Good morning. Good morning. All right, we are talking about what this morning? Judges. That's it. Rob, are you here? This is your class. Judges. You suggested it. Only took a year, but here we are. Judges. To begin our conversation about the book of Judges, a couple things real quick before we show a video from the Bible Project, as we do. I think it's helpful to have a visual to kind of see an overview of what the book's all about and that kind of stuff. But who here, let's see, anyone in loafers on Wednesday nights? Nobody. Okay. So what George 3 has been doing for us has been taking the material from the kids' classes and then presenting that to the loafers as the parents or grandparents of people that have kids in the Bible curriculum, but looking at that text in a deeper way because we're a bit older than, 6 or 7 years old, and that kind of stuff. So we're going through the same material the kids are going through to encourage us as parents and grandparents to engage the kids in conversation about what they learned and Rahab and the conquest of Canaan, for example, in the book of Joshua. And so this is directly after what George has presented thus far, going from Exodus, the actual Exodus through the Red Sea, and then the wilderness wanderings for 40 years until the first generation died away, and then the second generation now has begun. So this feels kind of like right on par for where I've been studying recently on Wednesday nights. But if we need a little recap, we can do a little bit of that before we get into the actual text this morning. But first, we're going to have a video from the Bible Project real quick. Okay?
Led the tribes of Israel into the promised land. He called them to be faithful to their covenant with God by obeying the commands of the Torah. And if they do this, they will show all the other nations what God is like. So Judges begins with the death of Joshua and basically tells the story of Israel's total failure. The book's name comes from the type of leaders Israel had in this period. Before they had any kings, the tribes were all governed by these judges. Now, don't think of a courtroom. These were regional political military leaders, more like a tribal chieftain. And you need to be warned, the book of Judges is very disturbing and violent. It tells the tragic tale of Israel's moral corruption, of its bad leadership, and basically how they become no different than the Canaanites. But this sad story is also meant to generate hope for the future, and you can see this in how the book's designed. There's a large introduction that sets the stage for Israel's failure as they don't drive out the remaining Canaanites. Then the large main section of the book has stories about the growing corruption of Israel's judges, and the progression here shows how Israel's leaders go from pretty good to okay to bad to worse. The concluding section is really disturbing and shows the corruption of the people of Israel as a whole. So let's dive in, and we can explore each part a bit more. The opening section begins with the tribes of Israel in their territories in the Promised Land. And while Joshua defeated some key Canaanite towns, there was still a lot of land to be taken and lots of Canaanites living in those areas. And so chapter 1 gives a long list of Canaanite groups and towns that Israel just failed to drive out from the land. Now, remember, the whole point of driving out the Canaanites was to avoid their moral corruption and their way of worshiping the gods through child sacrifice. God had called Israel to be a holy people, and that does not happen. Chapter 2 describes how Israel just moved in alongside the Canaanites and adopted all their cultural and religious practices. And it's right here that the story stops. For nearly a whole chapter, the narrator gives us an overview of everything that's about to happen in the body of the book. This part of Israel's history, the narrator says, was a series of cycles moving in a downward spiral. So Israel became like the Canaanites, and so they would sin against God. So God would allow them to be conquered and oppressed by the Canaanites, and eventually the Israelites would see the error of their ways and repent. So God would raise up a deliverer, a judge from among Israel who would defeat the enemy and bring about an era of peace. But eventually Israel would sin again and it would all start over. This cycle provides the literary design and flow for the next main section of the book. It gets repeated for each of the 6 main judges whose stories are told here. Now, the stories of the first 3 judges, Othniel, Ehud, and Deborah, they are epic adventures. They're also extremely bloody stories. Either the judge themselves or people who help the judge, they defeat their enemies and deliver the people of Israel. The stories about the next 3 judges are longer, and they focus in on the character flaws of the judges, which get increasingly worse. So Gideon, he begins pretty well. He's a coward of a man, but he eventually comes to trust that God can save Israel through him. And so he defeats a huge army of Midianites with only 300 men carrying torches and clay pots. But Gideon has a nasty temper, and he murders a bunch of fellow Israelites for not helping him in his battle. And then it all goes downhill from there. He makes an idol from the gold that he won in his battles. And then after he dies, all Israel worships the idol as a god, and the cycle begins again. The next main judge is Jephthah, who's something of a mafia thug living up in the hills. And when things get really bad for Israel, the elders come to him begging for his help. And Jephthah was a very effective leader. He won lots of battles against the Ammonites, but he was so unfamiliar with the God of Israel, he treats him like a Canaanite god. He vows to sacrifice his daughter if he wins the battle. This tragic story, it shows just how far Israel has fallen. They no longer know the character of their own God, which leads to murder and to false worship. The last judge, Samson, is by far the worst. His life began full of promise, but he has no regard for the God of Israel. He was promiscuous, violent, and arrogant. He did win brutally strategic victories over the Philistines, but only at the expense of his own integrity, and his life ends in a violent rush of mass murder. Now, a quick note here. You'll notice a repeated theme in the main section of the book, that at key moments, God's Spirit will empower each of these judges to accomplish these great acts of deliverance. Now, the fact that God uses these really screwed up people doesn't mean he endorses all or even any of their decisions. God is committed first and foremost to saving his people, but all he has to work with is these corrupt leaders. And so work with them he does. This whole section is designed to show just how bad things have gotten. You can't even tell the Israelites and the Canaanites apart anymore, and that's just the leaders. The final section shows Israel as a whole hitting bottom. There are 2 tragic stories here, and they are not for the faint of heart. They're structured by this key line that gets repeated 4 times at the close of the book. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The first story is about an Israelite named Micah who builds a private temple to an idol, and that gets plundered by a private army sent from the tribe of Dan. So they come and they steal everything, and then they go and burn down the peaceful city of Laish and murder all of its inhabitants. It's a horrifying story. When Israel forgets its God, might makes right. The final story of the book is even worse. It's a shocking tale of sexual abuse and violence, which all leads to Israel's first civil war. It's very disturbing. And that's the point. These stories are meant to serve as a warning. Israel's descent into self-destruction is the result of turning away from the God who loves them and saved them out of slavery in Egypt. And now Israel needs to be delivered again from themselves. The only glimmer of hope in this story is found in this repeated line in the last part of the book. It actually forms the last sentence of the story. Israel has no king. And so the stage is set for the following books to tell the origins of King David's family, the book of Ruth, and also the origins of kingship itself in Israel, the book of 1 Samuel. But the story of Judges has value as a tragedy. It's a sobering explanation of the human condition, and ultimately it points out the need for God's grace to send a king who will rescue his people. And that's the book of Judges. The book of Judges. So remember,
No. So those videos, I think, are helpful to kind of get a visual overview of what the book's all about before we dive into the text. Sometimes I know I have a tendency of just like going to a book and beginning reading it and studying it and then kind of getting lost. I can't find the forest, but the trees are all around me, right? So kind of an idea of what we're looking at before we dive into the actual text of the material I find helpful. Y'all are my regulars, so you've seen those videos before pretty much. I'll give you the necessary, not all of the things that the Bible Project does is necessarily scripturally accurate when it comes to our viewpoint, for sure, but I think the actual textual criticism part of seeing what the book's all about, I think is helpful. Okay, so we're going to look into the book of Joshua. Joshua? Yeah. Real quick, there's 3 lines that at the end of Joshua set the stage for the book of Judges. That was not a misspoken name, looking at Judges, or Joshua, real quick. And so we're looking at, chapter 24, beginning in verse 29. So here's the deal. Before we get to that, here's the deal. The deal is, Blaine and I have been working very hard on trying to prepare for January 1st of 2026. If you remember last year, we had our first 52-week study guide go out. We have a new theme for 2026. We have a new logo. We have a new study book, and I've got all my sermons prepped and ready to go. And the calendar, the full year at a glance calendar for the church and for the youth activities are all being completed as we speak. And so a lot of prep has gone into this. And I think I know our elders pretty well, but they like the idea of preparation and planning and getting things kind of done before it needs to be done. So the idea is this. As we're looking into the year of 2026, without ruining the big reveal whenever it comes in to replace this thing behind me, we're going to be looking at a different translation when it comes to our own personal devotions, when it comes to our own personal reading and studying. I've mentioned to you, I don't know how many times at this point, that sometimes you're so familiar with a text in a translation that you always use that it can kind of just be easy to gloss through and just kind of read the same things over and over again. And I've mentioned to you the value of looking at different translations to be able to get a different perspective on the same text that you all know. Who here has read Judges before? Okay, so basically everybody, right? Not everybody, but basically everybody. What translation have you read Judges in before? Okay, NASB, NIV, King James. Oh yeah. ESV, you have? Okay. Who's ever read the CSB? CSB, Christian Standard Bible. It came out in 2020, so it's all of 5 years old. Okay. If you've been in the ladies' class that Melissa has taught and Auburn has taught, they've been reading the CSB, whether they told you that or not. That's the translation that they've been using. And so I make fun of Auburn whenever I can, because that's just, that's the dynamic. If I pick on you, then we're friends. If I don't pick on you, we're not friends yet, right? So Auburn tried to expound to me the benefits of using the CSB, and I made fun of the CSB for the last 2 years. And then Melissa got it, and I couldn't be as obstinate in picking on her for using the CSB. So I started to look through it, look at the criticisms of that translation, and it's actually a pretty good one. So here is the way that I explain it in my own brain, which may not make any sense to you. So I think the ESV is what the King James always was, meaning they use the most reliable text they have at the time to try to give you the most literal word-for-word translation possible. It's what the King James was in its day. Now, of course, no Dead Sea Scrolls, no newer texts were discovered until like 1860. That was after King James. So the King James no longer is the most accurate translation in the English language because it's basing itself off of a newer text than we have currently. So I think the ESV, personally, for me, if I'm doing a word-for-word study, has value because it's using the most ancient sources possible to try to state what the Word of God is. Does that make sense? Okay, you with me so far? You don't have to agree with me, but you understand what I'm saying? Okay, all right. I think what the CSB is what the NIV wanted to be but couldn't. Okay. Who was around in the 70s? The 1970s? Okay. Personal question? Well, yeah. I'm looking out and seeing some gray hair. I want to make sure y'all were around and cognizant. Okay, so what was the NIV's goal in trying to be? Do you remember that? Well, not as accurate as possible. Okay, to be more understandable than the King James, basically is what it was. It was to be not a paraphrase, but a translation which was supposed to be easier to read and comprehend, was the idea. Okay? I think the CSB has done a great job in doing that, in that the actual translation itself is based on the Holman Christian Standard Bible, CSB, right? They use that text, which came from the NASB, the New American Standard Bible. So they're using a good translation as the backbone, the NASB. They're using their version of the Holman Christian Standard Bible and then making it more accessible to the English speaker today in 2020, which is when it came out. And so what I'd like to do for this class, looking at Judges, since no one, as far as I'm aware, has studied Judges from the CSB, we're going to use that as our main text for this class. I know it's scary. Everybody okay? Well, it's going to be on the screen. If you got it on your phone, hey. Yeah, you sure can. Yeah. Mary. Yeah. Don't push the speaker.
Okay, so I can download without hitting the audio.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to.
Oh no. You would never interrupt, Mary. Okay. So CSB available for free on the internet if you have the Wi-Fi password here. If not, I'll give it to you.
I think we all have had a conglomeration of different versions.
Yeah.
We have become quite adept at reading this version.
Yeah.
And reading and hearing and are capable of making it make sense.
Yeah.
And we appreciate that, so.
Yeah. So the reason why I say that, after saying that Blaine and I have been working hard for 2026, is we're going to be using the CSB for our devotional readings of 2026. So when you get your study book for the currently unrevealed name or for the theme of 2026, the book that I made has the CSB for your readings of the week. Now, if you don't have a CSB at home and you don't want to read the CSB, I still have the scripture there. You can pull out your translation that you like better and read it there. But I've inserted the CSB into our study book for 2026 to be able to give you a different version to read so it's not the same thing. We just read 52 weeks worth of ESV in our first version of the study book. Okay? So again, if you don't want to do that, I'm not going to make you do that. You don't have to. This is not a matter of salvation, Lisa, for anyone that doesn't want to do it. Right?
Wouldn't it be nice if somebody
Yeah.
made this giant purchase of the ABC version at a discount price for those of us that might want to add that to their library?
Well, wouldn't you know, you got this guy here whose job it is to preach the Word of God to you? Yeah, and he has a stock of Bibles in his office, and it has a big old post-it that says, for anyone who requests one, this is for them. Weird, right? You have not because you ask not. Okay. Well, you talk to the guy whose office it is. I know that's difficult for a lot of you to talk to me, but I can. Well, not yet. Okay, verse 29. After these things, Joshua, the son of Nun, died at the age of 110. Now he's dead. Okay. So at the end of the book of Joshua, Joshua dies. He's 110 years old. Lived a good long life, right? Full of memories. Okay. So you know the joke, don't you? Who's the only person in the Bible who never had a mother or father? And you all say, Adam. And I go, no, wrong, it's Joshua. He's the son of Nun. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, verse 30. They buried him in his allotted territory at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaish. We all know where that is, so of course, right there. Verse 31. Israel worshiped the Lord throughout Joshua's lifetime and during the lifetimes of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had experienced all the works the Lord had done for Israel. So, okay, so far so good, right? So during Joshua's whole lifetime and the elders who lived beyond Joshua's lifetime, they all worshiped the Lord. They lived through the experiences of what God did for them. Talking about crossing through the Jordan River, the dry ground that God gave them to pass over, conquest of Ai and Jericho and all the big cities. Okay, verse 32, Joseph's bones, which is, if you remember, from the end of Genesis. Joseph, when he allowed the Egyptians to prepare for the 7 years of famine that was so severe, the Israelites, before they were Israelites, came to Egypt asking Joseph, who's in charge of the grain, for grain. He says at the end of all of Genesis, hey, make sure that you don't leave my bones in Egypt. Bring them with you when the Lord delivers you out of the Egyptian households. Okay? Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried in Shechem in the parcel of land Jacob had purchased from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of silver. It was an inheritance for Joseph's descendants. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah, which had been given to his son Phinehas in the hill of the country of Ephraim. So there's a whole lot of kind of reminders in there. Long story short, things were going well for the Israelites in the promised land finally, and they followed after the Lord. Great news. Well, no. Judges. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, who will be the first to fight for us against the Canaanites? Curious question. Because you remember at the beginning of Joshua, the Lord had a command and a decree of what they were to do with the people that lived in the land of Canaan. What was that command? Wipe them out, utterly destroy, as the King James would say, right? To utterly wipe them all out. And from the video a second ago, the purpose of that big picture is that we don't want the Canaanites and their idolatry to influence the people of Israel to worship after gods that are not gods, right? The Lord has revealed himself to the Israelites. They have 613 commandments to follow. They know who Yahweh is, and he is a jealous God that does not want his people to worship another not God, but him. Right? So by asking the question, who will fight for us first against the Canaanites, what does that tell us? Then what, if there are Canaanites and they've not done what God told them to do, right? Now, is there a king in Israel? Kind of trick question, right? Yeah. I mean, no, there's no physical, earthly, human king. There should be a king, though, through the Lord, right? So they're going to their king. Good. Hey, we didn't listen to you the first time, but here's the second time. Who can we send out to fight against the Canaanites? The Lord answered, Judah is to go. I have handed the land over to him. Okay, so what's that mean? Okay, the Lord gave them the promised land, if you remember the report of the spies, right? And the Lord says, I've already given the land, the victory to Judah. So Judah's supposed to go. It's already been done. It's kind of helpful if you've got a God who's outside of space and time, and he knows what the future will be, and you do the thing God tells you to do, and the future comes to pass, right? That's kind of a helpful thing, right? Isn't that crazy? Okay, so Judah, the people of Judah, said to his brother Simeon, come with me to my allotted territory, and let's fight against the Canaanites. I will also go with you to your allotted territory. So Simeon went with him. Okay, so you have the people of Judah saying, hey, this is where we're supposed to be. This is our place. Can you come help us fight the Canaanites here? If you do that, I'll help you in your fight. I mean, that's okay. It is nice when siblings get along, right? I wouldn't know what that's like, but when siblings get along, it's sometimes nice. Okay. Verse 4. When Judah attacked, the Lord handed the Canaanites and the Perizzites over to them. They struck down 10,000 men in Bezek. They found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek. Who would have thought? This is a guy in a location. Okay. Fought against him, struck down the Canaanites and the Perizzites. When Adoni-Bezek fled, they pursued him, caught him, cut off his thumbs and big toes. As you do. Okay, so small little commentary here. I was a 16-year-old boy reading this verse for the first time as a brand new convert, and I'm like, what? This is in the Bible? That boring book? Like, what? Okay, so this is one of those. Okay. Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. Okay? God has repaid me for what I have done. They brought him to what's now called Jerusalem, and he died there. So why would you cut off your thumbs and big toes of your enemy?
You can't run and you can't hold a weapon.
Okay, exactly right. If you don't have big toes, I'm told it's hard to run. Right? If you don't have any thumbs, it's really hard to grip a sword. Right? So you're making him useless when it comes to combat. Okay. So this guy, Adoni-Bezek, was the first big victory post-Joshua. Okay. Verse 8. The men of Judah fought against modern-day Jerusalem, captured it, put it to the sword, and set the city on fire. Again, as you do. You know, that's the way it works. Afterward, the men of Judah marched down to fight against the Canaanites who were living in the hill country, the Negev, and the Judean foothills. Judah also marched against the Canaanites who were living in Hebron. In case you didn't know, it was formerly named Kirjath Arba, of course. They struck down Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, which apparently were people that were well known back in the day. From there, they marched against the residents of Debir. It was formerly known as Kiriath Sefer. Caleb said, okay, Caleb. All right, so Caleb is like a contemporary of Joshua, who was Moses' second-hand man, right? Like his assistant, his second and his lieutenant, whatever. That's who Joshua was to Moses. Caleb was the other spy of the 12 who had a good report, right? Okay, so you've got 12 spies going out back in the day. You got Joshua and Caleb saying, hey, the Lord's given us the victory. We are well able to overcome it, right? And everybody else said, nah, they're scary. They're big people. We can't win no matter what we do. So the only ones who were allowed to live to conquer the land of Canaan of that second generation were the second generation, Joshua, who was there, the son of Nun, and then Caleb, right? Okay, verse 12. Caleb said, "Whoever attacks and captures Kiriath Sepher, I will give my daughter Asa to him as a wife." So he's putting up his daughter as a reward, a victory prize for the person who goes and conquers this hill country. Yep.
Do we know how old Joshua was when they came into the country? How long after the timeline?
Top of my head now. We have a guesstimate of like 60 years.
I'm thinking 50, 60 years they've been, but the Canaanites are still there.
Well, what happens in Judges, as we've been reading,
What were they doing those last?
so there's a kind of a Venn diagram going on here. So some of this in the book of Judges takes place before the death of Joshua. So Caleb's still around at this point. So we're kind of getting a play-by-play of what the division of the land kind of looked like for a bit, and then we go into the details of all our favorite assassins. Okay, so stand by. So Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's youngest brother, captured it, and Caleb gave his daughter Asa to him as his wife. Right. Do we see any problems with that? Well, I mean, you know, I used to preach in West Virginia. She was tickled, no doubt. Keeping it in the family. All right. Verse 14. When she arrived, she persuaded Othniel to ask her father for a field. So she's coming with, hey, you know, husband, cousin. Would it be great if we had this field over here? As she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What do you want?" As you do, right? Verse 15, she answered him, "Give me a blessing. Since you've given me the land in Negev, give me springs also." So Caleb gave her both the upper and the lower springs. So now we have an idea of kind of where people are going, where they're settling down, where they're going to be. This is important because this is not just a story of legends, right? It's not a superhero novel. This is a story about real people that lived in the land. They knew where they were going, and they were writing a history book to kind of give the descendants an idea of the origin story of their people in that land, right? Okay, so the descendants of the Kenites, Moses' father-in-law, had gone up with the men of Judah from the city of palms to the wilderness of Judah, which was Negev and Arad. So they went to live among the people. Judah went with his brother Simeon, struck the Canaanites who were living in Zephath, and completely destroyed the town. Okay, so they named the town Hormah. Verse 18, Judah captured Gaza and its territory, Ashkelon and its territory. So the Ashkelon was a primary city of the Philistines. It's one of those big kind of compounds of the Philistine nation. Okay. And enabled them to take possession of the hill country, but they could not drive out the people who were living in the plain because those people had iron chariots. Could not do it. Was impossible for them to do. Despite the fact that they walked across the Jordan River because the water was piling up on one side and they could walk across the dry ground of the riverbed, they were unable to do it. Okay, verse 20, Judah gave Hebron to Caleb just as Moses had promised. So then Caleb drove out the 3 sons of Anak who lived there. There's a story previous to this in which you've got Caleb as an old man look at a mountain with giants living on the mountain, and Caleb asked Moses for permission to go and take that city. He's an old man. And Moses says, "Do you think you're going to be able to do this?" He goes, "I got it. Don't worry about it." They went up there. He killed the giants, took the land. It's finally been passed on to Moses. That's the place that he owns now. Okay. Verse 21, at the same time, the Benjamites did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. The Jebusites have lived among the Benjamites in Jerusalem to this day. Okay, so what do we get at verse 21? Okay, disobedience. That's good. Supposed to wipe them out, didn't do it. Mixed results, they got it, but, some people still live there that used to live there. They didn't do it. Could not do it. Unable to do it. With the God of creation of heaven and earth, couldn't do it. Weird. We also get, at the very end, the last sentence here in the English, a stamp of when this book was written. Don't miss those. Those are really important in the Old Testament especially. The Jebusites have lived among the Benjamites in Jerusalem to this day. At the time of writing this account, there are still Jebusites living in the land of the Benjamites in Jerusalem, right? So you get a little preview of so you got a stamp here of when this was written, this was still called Jerusalem. That's good to know. There are Benjamites living in Jerusalem, good to know, and you've got Jebusites living among them. Okay, that's kind of a history thing for you. Okay, verse 22, the house of Joseph also attacked Bethel. All right, so here's one small thing to know when you're reading, especially in the Old Testament, is when you've got a name of a town or a location or a city, you often get the later date placed on there instead of the original date, or the title, right? So Bethel is what it's called. The town was formerly called Luz. Now, we've got Bethel back in Genesis as well. Do you remember the location where Jacob saw a great staircase or ladder, if you will, with angels descending up and down on it? He was having for his pillow, he had a stone. That morning, after he saw that vision, woke up and slaughtered an animal there as a sacrifice to God. He named that place Bethel, right? House of God. So Bethel, Beth is house of, Elohim is God. So he named that place Bethel, house of God. And here it is again. The people who moved in after Jacob renamed it Luz. So now they said, no, it's Bethel. We know our history. Okay. Verse 24, the spies saw a man coming out of the town and said to him, please show us how to get into this town and we will show you kindness. So you've got the army here. You've got some people going to do some reconnaissance. They see a guy coming out of Bethel and they said, hey, listen, can you show us how to get in? We're lost. We don't know the way. If you do, we'll show you kindness. When he showed them the way into the town, they put the town to the sword, but released the man and his entire family. Then the man went to the land of the Hittites, built a town, and named it Luz. That is its name still today. Okay, we're going to pause here in 27 of chapter 1. We got a little bit more of kind of setting the stage for where the book of Judges takes place, and then we get into the actual judges, deliverers, or literally saviors of the people from that point forward. Okay, a lot of prep work, a lot of introduction for you, but I want to kind of give you this as well. When we get to it, we've thankfully got, I can zoom in, can I? Yeah. I can give you locations of where these things take place, where the judge was from, where he went, and so on as we go through. Okay? So again, thank you for your time and your attention this morning. We'll pick this up, Lord willing, next week. We'll have about 20 minutes before worship begins.